prosperous merchants, John Bremond and John Robinson, developed a close friendship throughout the years that really transcended generations. 6 of their children married. There were Bremonds who married Robinsons, Robinsons who married Bremonds, and they all decided to buy this block of property and make their homes there. So Eugene Bremond became, and here's the block, by the way. This is Guadalupe Street here, 7th Street, 8th Street, and the Bremond Block is this whole block right here. So that's where we'll be traveling this evening. Eugene Bremond became a successful banker while his brother became a merchant, and John Bremond Sr., you can see him there off to the side, beautiful bowler hat there. He was the father of Austin Fire Department. He came from New York where he knew about these things. And when he came to Austin, they said, oh man, that's our guy to run the fire department. And so he was appointed the foreman of the newly created fire department, Hook and Ladder Fire Company #1, Austin's first volunteer fire company. And that was originated on September 25th of 1857. John Bremond, or rather Eugene Bremond, built the first Bremond house right around here on the Bremond Block, the southwest corner, and the building continued around the block until finally, 24 years later, his son, John Bremond Jr., built the final one right here on this particular block. And in addition to the Bremonds on the main block bordering Guadalupe Street between 7th and 8th Streets here is San Antonio Street. And there were several houses along this street which were built or altered by the North family. So let's meet the North family and learn about the home and buildings that they built, including Chateau Bellevue. And this is Harvey North right here. And Harvey North was a real estate guy from New Orleans who liked to take his family on vacations to Europe. And while they were there, they always loved to tour through and gawk at castles. And Harvey North, by the way, was part of the honor guard for Abraham Lincoln's funeral procession. And when they made the move to Austin, they decided to build their home alongside a quarry where they could get a lot of available limestone for the buildings that they were going to be building. And it was named, the building was named Bellevue by Catherine North. And Bellevue was Italian for a beautiful view, which the home must have had, particularly up here on the upper level, looking south toward the river. And the river at that time was the Colorado River. Of course, we know it today as Lady Bird Lake, although some holdovers still refer to it as Town Square. So this Victorian mansion is now home to the Austin Women's Club. And it started as a kind of a low profile group formed by top female leaders in the 1920s, including Governor Miriam Ma Ferguson. And the imposing structure now hosts other meetings, other civic club groups, but mostly the Austin Women's Club. The Daughters of the American Revolution, however, also meet there as well. So outsiders can rent it for weddings and other celebrations, and others can tour the handsome interiors as part of the a tour of historic buildings and downtown homes in downtown Austin. And that's kind of a sad tour. If you take the historic tour downtown that they used to offer on the weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, that led from the Capitol building, it's kind of sad tour because a lot of it is them showing you photos of old glorious Victorian homes that were now torn down and a very drab looking government building put it in its place. And it just makes me want to slap whoever was in charge of the 1970s in Austin. So I took one of these tours with a very capable tour guide by the name of Elizabeth, who is one of the few tour guides in town who is also a member of the Austin Women's Club. So she's permitted to go inside the building and take people around. And she also works part-time for Austin Ghost Tours. So she's hip to what we're all about and then stuff like that. So the time that I went on Elizabeth's tour, she told me beforehand, she said, do not ask about the hauntings because they're just going to deny it. But as we wandered around the building, and it was magnificent. The lights were flickering furiously, and the flickering seemed to be following us around. And in fact, in this stairwell right here, while I was taking this photo, the lights went out. And I remember telling Elizabeth, ha ha ha, that's not very funny, Elizabeth. You know that I have a tendency to fall and break something on me. And she said, no, 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 Monica, if you'll notice, the light switch for the stairwell is down there by you. So that was very interesting. So I asked, with a very sly grin, I asked one of the members of the Austin Women's Club, hey, do the lights always flicker this much? And she seemed a little nervous, but she also seemed to recognize me or know who I was. And she kind of had this smile, this hospitality smile on her face, but there was a sort of a grit to her teeth that she said, I know what you're asking, and no, it's not that. So I was going, okay. But then as we left the building, Elizabeth turned around to me and said, I've never seen the lights flicker like that before. And I think she was telling you hello. So let me get to who she is in just a moment. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about the chateau. So it wasn't always a castle, didn't always look like this. In 1874, the North family just built a two-story wooden house with a basement on this bluff of Little Shoal Creek. And a 19th century map will show you that the waterway wound from the West Campus through the residential district to join Shoal Creek just above its mouth, and then went down to the Colorado River. And Little Shoal Creek now flows underground mostly through a wide tunnel. Well, by 1876, the North family's fortune in Austin real estate began to falter, and just 2 years after building Bellevue Place, the place was up for sale. Catherine North finally sold the building to Augusta and William Pendleton Gaines in 1881. And the mansion, unfortunately, only sold for half the amount that it cost the Norths to build. And Gaines was the editor of the Austin American Statesman. And he had a few headlines of his own. Let me tell you, you see, although William Gaines purchased the home, it returned to Catherine's possession following a few minor legal issues. And that's a fascinating little sidebar about a really messy divorce. And I insist we go there because it kind of plays into this. So it's not the actual Gaines couple right here, but this will kind of give you a little glimpse into what the attitude was like. This is from a New York Times article dated October of 1891. The fight, the divorce, is for possession of a little girl, a daughter. When the couple separated, Mrs. Gaines came to the home of her parents, bringing her little 4-year-old daughter with her. Colonel Gaines followed her and abducted the child under sensational circumstances. The mother employed detectives and soon found out the little one was in Austin. For 18 months, the mother made continuous but fruitless efforts to get the child back, making 3 trips to Texas for the purpose. She then resolved to do as her husband did, steal the girl. She was assisted by her father in making all the arrangements. She dressed herself as a schoolgirl and went to Austin and discovered that Colonel Gaines, who traveled about considerably, always took the child with him and in the company of a nurse as well. She followed them about and finally saw her opportunity in Houston. She drove in a closed carriage to where the child was playing, seized the child, drove to a landing by a bayou that runs into Galveston Bay. Her father, Captain Evans, had a tugboat waiting, and they were bound for it, and they were caught up in a storm on the bay. Well, of course they were. And then they tried to put into a point where Galveston Bay met the Austin, or the Southern Pacific Railroad, so that they could easily reach the railroad station. Meanwhile, her husband, Mr. Gaines, with a posse of Texas Rangers, of course, had started in pursuit, and at the railroad station overtook the abductors. The little girl was disguised in boy's clothing, but the sheriff insisted on making an examination to see if it was really the daughter. That's when the mother, revolver in hand, stepped forward and said she would kill him if he touched the child. Then one of the posse of rangers, shotgun in hand, came to the front and said, "I will never assist in taking a child from its mother, madam. I will be your escort to the Louisiana state line." The sheriff kept his word, and they got away. They did that. Now, is that a messy divorce or isn't it? So Gaines married a second time, more successfully this time, but still, the whole thing with the mansion, he just couldn't. He just couldn't. So what wedged this hopeful couple apart? Some people say it was because they weren't getting very much sleep. And the reason was they kept being awakened in the middle of the night by someone playing the piano. The trouble is, nobody in their household knew how to play the piano. And every time they went down to investigate, the music would stop and there would be no one in the room. Then the whole brouhaha with the abduction, and you know what? Gaines was just done with the house. So he sold it back to Catherine. Well, in 1892, Major Ira Evans, no relation to the Captain Evans of the tugboat from that last story, he bought Bellevue Place and turned the home into this castle that we know today with the help of noted Texas architect Alfred Giles. And he started with the North's wooden porch and replaced it with limestone. And then Giles extended the home toward the west with a series of these graceful limestone arches. And he fortified the rooftops and the side entrance and made the side entrance beautiful with carved limestone. It was stunning. Now in Evans' day, tiered gardens led to a pond and a park where performances were given because the Evans loved to party. So, of course, music and its frequency and energy often attracts spirits as well. And imagine this, if you will, the dinner is over and the men are having their cordials and the women are having their brandies and there's a short recital maybe or something like that. And then the flame of the gas lanterns are lowered and everybody gathers around and they bring the children up close and everybody settles in and they continue that long time Victorian tradition of telling ghost stories. And in particular about their own resident ghost because they had encountered Atalia North, one of the daughters of Catherine and Harvey North. Just before I began giving tours, the guy who was training me showed me an interesting photo taken on his tour. The Austin Women's Club is generally closed by the time the tour got there, and the building was empty and dark. And we would creak open the wrought iron gate and lead people up to this porch right here, that little stand right there, maybe even closer on the porch right here. And we would tell Atalia's sad story. She was a gifted pianist. In fact, so gifted that her parents insisted that she go abroad to study music. And she did this very enthusiastically, but after a year, she grew homesick. And she wrote to her family asking if she could come home for a visit. And of course, they were going to welcome her. You see, what Atalia didn't know was that her parents, Harvey and Catherine, were busy building a little cottage, which was going to be Atalia's private quarters and music studio. And when she came back on the ship across the Atlantic, she grew very ill. And by the time the ship docked in New York, before she could travel on to go to Galveston to meet her family, she had pneumonia and she was hospitalized and she died soon after. Harvey and Catherine were devastated by this loss. They had building projects up and down the block, including her cottage, that they just simply abandoned. And they left the house, and Harvey followed his daughter in death soon after in 1881. So it was she who played the piano in the middle of the night, freaking out the Gaines family. And it was she who played with the Evans little daughters as well, where it was said that they would even play duets. They'd be even caught playing duets on the piano downstairs with one of the Evans daughters and this ghost fingering the keys there at the piano. And it was she who appeared in the window one night, listening to the story of her life, her death, and her afterlife. So this photo was taken of Kevin's tour, and he's standing there telling the story. Everyone's listening in, and so is Natalia right there. Sometimes she's seen on the upper portico on the balcony there, longingly gazing at the little cottage down the street. This is the cottage that was to be her private quarters and music studio. I once heard a story of a resident of the cottage, and it's rental property now, of them seeing her quite often. And they always thought that maybe they were just imagining something. And then one night they were having a get together, and everybody was kind of milling around and such. And a latecomer came up the walk there and was let inside. And she said, while you were coming to the door, I happened to glance over at that mansion next door, and there's a girl standing on the upper balcony staring at your cottage right here. And the host of the gathering said, oh wait, you can see her too. So yeah, that's Italia. As far as we know, she's still around, and I'm glad she flickered the lights on my visit, because I will insist on continuing to tell her story. So just down the street of this uneven sidewalk where tree roots intrude into the concrete and bricks, I would often tell people that our next stop would be a 5-story building at the bottom of the hill at the curve, and that they were to meet me there. And I'd take my time getting down there, and they'd be down there at the curve of the hill looking around for a 5-story building. Because you see, what they didn't know about the North Flats House and House, built in 1879 and recently renovated, was that it stood on the edge of that quarry. Here's the back of the building, and they're standing right about here, and the rest of the building cascades down the side of the quarry right here. It's always been an apartment building as far as I can remember. It's quite old. It certainly seems to be constantly in use. But I've never run into anyone who can tell me any ghost stories about it. So we'll move on farther down the street as soon as I find my cursor. There it is. So across the street, as you go around the bend and head east towards Guadalupe, you'll run into the home of Patriarch Eugene Bremond. And Eugene Bremond, his house has beautiful porches that have scroll saw brackets and paired slendered columns right here. And it was built in 1873, and the home was expanded just about 4 years later to reach like double its size into the house that it is today. And it's classic Victorian architecture, Southern touches, double columns, large wraparound porch. And I was walking the block one afternoon, and I happened to run into a gentleman, a lawyer, who offices in the house. And I asked him if he had any personal experiences. And he said, you know, there's always a feeling of comfort and someone watching out for us. It feels like a male figure. But he did tell me that a film crew borrowed the house one day for a shoot. I don't remember what exact film it was or anything, or even if it was made, because he wanted to leave them alone. He left for a couple of hours to not get in their way. And when he came back at lunchtime, he asked how things were going, and they said, "Oh, it's been horrible, particularly our sound guy, because he's under headphones and he's listening very carefully to dialogue and the ambient noise. And if a car is coming down the street, we have to stop. And he keeps yelling, 'Cut, cut, wait. Where is that kid?' Because he keeps hearing a child giggle and run around the porches." And of course, there's no child in the building, and nobody else who was on the shoot could hear what he was hearing. He was only hearing it under headphones, and every time he heard it, he had to stop everything, and they had to reset and start all over again. So it had been a very long morning. And like I said, I'm not sure what film it was or if they ever got it done, but that child made their shoots quite difficult. Another interesting architectural aspect about this house is the huge windows right here that lead out onto that wraparound porch. It's customary in the Victorian era, and in particular in the South, to have large windows like this that allow you to step out through the window onto the porch. See, because back then you were taxed by how many doors you had. So if you could gain entry or exit to and from a sleeping porch or something like that through a window rather than a door, it gave you a little bit of a tax break right there. So speaking of lawyers, a lot of different law firms have made their home next door at the Pierre Bremond house in the center of the block. This one was built in 1898, and it was the second to the last in the series of homes to be built on the block. It's subdued late Victorian, low-pitched hip roof right there, double galley, and a very sort of unobtrusive tower on the west side right there. And Pierre built this home when he married. Up until then, he was a confirmed bachelor. Oh, he played the field. He was a real man about town. He was car crazy. He was one of the first in town to have a gas-powered automobile. He particularly liked the Stearns automobile, and in fact, he opened up a Stearns motor car dealership in town in addition to being a banker. And he would race up and down the city streets at in excess of 10 miles per hour, which was the posted speed limit. And the cops couldn't catch him because they were still on horseback, but they knew who he was. I mean, he's one of the few guys in town that had an automobile. And so they would just, sort of let it pass. They let him have his fun. So he met athletic socialite Nina Louise Abadi, and his heart was stolen. And he was all set to give up his gadabout lifestyle and sign up for blissful domesticity. And although she was game for any adventure, she looks more than a little wistful in this photo. That is Pierre's mom right there. And Nina is relegated to the rumble seat back there in the back as they're heading out to take part in a parade. As you can see the beautiful automobile bedecked with all those lovely flowers. Although, Pierre and Nina always wanted to get married and have children, have a big family, but Nina was barren and it broke her heart. And so she would often ask neighborhood children to come and play in the yard that they had, the big oak trees. And she would come out on the balcony and watch them and enjoy them sort of vicariously as her children. So on more than one occasion, as Austin ghost tours would come down the street and we would stop in front of Nina and Pierre's house, if there would be little children on the tour, before we would tell anything about the history of the building, kids would point up to this balcony right there and ask us, who's that pretty lady? Who's that woman up there with the dark hair? She's waving at me. So that was more than one occasion that we would hear that story. Of course, the adults could never see her, but children certainly could. So she apparently still had that connection with children. But Nina's not the only occupant, apparently, of this house. People who office in this building tell us that when they walk up the street, they can see a man standing in what is today a conference room. It was once the bedroom, and he'll be looking out the window at them or staring at the fireplace. And one worker coming up the walk also to enter the building very distinctly said that she saw a woman with a blue glow about her looking back through the window, serene yet sad expression. Our friends Billy Driver and Mark Moreau of the TV show Strange Town did an investigation there at the Bremond house, Pierre Bremond's house, back in 2015. And when they did a shack hack session in the conference room that I just showed you. And for those of you who missed my astonishing evidence, the virtual tour that I did a few weeks ago, a shack hack is sometimes called a ghost box or a Frank's box. And how it works is that the scan and seek button has been disabled, and spirits can utilize the white noise in order to answer questions directly. So here is what they found in the conference room.
So if there's anyone here, Come say hello.
They found me.
Yeah. Is this Nina? You can say yes. Is there anybody in this room with us? Hello. Can you tell us your name? Nina, are you in here with us?
Is this Nina confirming that she is in what she knows as the bedroom?
Nina, are you in here with us?
Fascinating stuff. So let's move from Pierre's house now to a little farther down the street, down 7th Street to the iconic home. Whoop, oh, there we go. Of the John Bremond Jr. house, built in 1886. And this home, when I would lead tours, I would stop by the gate and I would lead everybody in a chorus of the Addams Family theme song. Because that's what it looked like to me, but it's appeared in a lot of textbooks about architecture and a lot of guidebooks about the city of Austin. And this is another home that was built by Mr. Feigl, George Feigl. And it was one of the first buildings. It's been reputed that this is one of the first homes in Austin to have indoor bathrooms. It's always important. Total cost to build this marvelous edifice right here, $44,000. Of course, that's in 1880s money. So today it's owned by the Texas Classroom Teachers Association. And we've gone in there before and we've asked them to tell us about your ghosts, to which they've looked at us from across the desk and said very sternly, "Weird teachers, go away." But sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you run into somebody, say, a couple drinks in at the Driscoll Bar, or maybe Moonshine's Patio Bar and Grill. And they see your costume and your hat and your name badge, and they have a few stories to tell because they've had a drink or two. And I was lucky to get this story from one particular woman who worked in this building. And you work
at the John Bremond House for Texas Classroom Teachers Association.
All right. We've been waiting for stories like on that building.
We don't have a lot because it's a benevolent ghost. It's a woman. We all feel like it's a female presence. But you'll just catch glimpses of her out of the corner of your eye, or just kind of feel like someone's standing near you. And I make sure when I leave, if I'm the last person to leave, I always say goodnight.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah, because you don't feel her very much during the day. It's usually if you're there real early, or if you're there 6 or 7-ish.
Yeah.
In the evening. Dusk. It's a little bit less crowded. Yeah. Everyone has everyone I know that works there at least at one point in time has felt like, I think there's someone here with me. I have on more than one occasion thought I've seen people in the windows before. So
and these, the windows are high up.
Yeah.
So it's not like there could be anyone outside staring in, because it's like one huge floor up.
Yeah, they're tall stairs.
Yes.
But yeah, you do. And I have great big bay windows in my office, and sometimes when I drive by at night, they'll just see like a shadow in there.
Yeah, so you can see how far up the windows are. It'd be impossible to see anybody, looking in from this height unless they, had extraordinary abilities. So before we leave this neighborhood, whoops, where'd you go? So before we leave this neighborhood, I want to tell you a story about a recent victory. I feel these historic homes are protected despite massive amounts of development underway. And that protection might have something to do with a curse. That's right, a curse. And you work. What? It takes us back to this building right here, the Alamo Hotel, which once stood where Guadalupe meets 6th Street. So think of this right here as 6th Street, and this is Guadalupe, and you know where we are now. So the Alamo was enigmatic throughout its history, 1920s to 1980s. It's been both a decent hotel occupied by traveling salesmen and politicians, and slowly declined into what some people called a popular place to commit suicide. Yeah, and by the end of its era, the Alamo's reputation was, Skid Row, a place for people on the margins to either get back on their feet or get off their feet entirely. The Alamo grew into an icon of sorts in Austin culture, notably enough to appear in both the Clash's music video for Rock the Casbah and Poncho and Lefty, recorded by Willie Nelson and Merrill Haggard. And a number of musical guests appeared there too, as you can see. Townes Van Zandt, Lucinda Williams, Lyle Lovett, Joe Eli. They've all played in the lounge. So back in 1925, and you can see those magnificent cars there, that this is just after the hotel first opened. The newly constructed Alamo Hotel opened to the public, built at a cost of $250,000, and adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $3.5 million. 80 rooms, 5 stories, all the necessary trappings of luxury, plenty of gold trim in the lobby, baths in every room, a restaurant that only employed, according to an Austin Statesman ad, experienced white help. Those were the days. I mean, I make no comment. I'm just saying that's what the ad said. The hotel changed ownership a lot of times in the 1920s, hoping to rent rooms to traveling businessmen and slowly expanding its force to tourists and then long-term leased residents. And the average daily rate ran about $2.50 at that time. Oh, it also had a parking garage, 100 spaces in a garage. And that must have been enormous and very rare for that era. Beside the mention of a well-loved coffee shop and drugstore and barbershop operating out of the ground floor retail spaces in the building, there's really not much more interesting stuff until, except maybe when the manager in 1945 was allegedly selling heroin at the front desk. Yeah, not a smart move. But things really started pepping up once again in the 1960s when the Austin entrepreneur Eli Garza took over operations of the lounge. And he bought this 125-year-old bar and moved it into the lounge area. And then, man, all those great musicians started playing gigs there. And from what I hear, it's crowded and smoky and everything you'd imagine an Austin dive bar with future famous people to be. Speaking of future famous people, Harry Anderson lived there before finding fame as the judge on Night Court. And one of the more legendary occupants was Sam Houston Johnson, the younger brother to Lyndon Baines Johnson. And he in fact died in the hotel from complications from lung cancer. He was a heavy smoker and a heavy drinker. And it was said that he found salvation before he passed away. So yeah, the Alamo Lounge lasted until about 1981, and then the whole block was purchased by the Lamar Savings and Loan Association, which planned to develop a new headquarters known as the Lamar Financial Plaza atop the site. And that kind of made some people mad. The Alamo Hotel was demolished in '84, but its legend lives on thanks to the Alamo curse. You see, there was a street preacher by the name of Tony Hearn, and he went around, he wanted a mission built there. That wasn't going to happen. So he mixed red food coloring with red wine vinegar and poured it out blood-like around the perimeter of the Alamo Hotel and cursed the land and said that the curse would prevent anyone from making money off the property if they didn't consider the interests of the poor. And the curse appeared to work pretty well, at least for the Lamar folks, because during the savings and loan crisis of the 1980s, the company failed and went out of business. Oh, and not only that, but the president and CEO of the S&L, Stanley Adams, was indicted and convicted of fraud. And it was said by the federal government that he was one of the 100 worst grifters and had what was coming to him. So the site of the Alamo Hotel remained empty until the extended stay hotel moved there back in 2000, and its backers seemed unafraid of cursed land and omens, and maybe they should have been a little bit more wary, because look what happened last October. That's right, they tore it down. The extended stay overstayed its welcome. Nobody liked it much anyway. And you know what? It's going to go there instead, because you know what Austin really, really needs? That's right, 6X Guadalupe, the latest, tallest glass and chrome structure in the city of Austin, the monstrosity known as 6X Guadalupe, which chances are a lot of people are going to be misnaming 6X Guadalupe because they don't know any better. 66 stories of offices and apartments taking up the whole block. Well, almost the whole block, because there's one thing you can't see in this rendering. One thing you can't, and by the way, the beautiful historic Bremond Block is right there. Yeah. There's one thing you can't see in this rendering. They did come out with another rendering, though, of another side of the building where you can see this. What the heck is that? Bremond Block is over here. What the heck is that building? That historic building is, drum roll please, the James T. Brown House, built in 1858, built about the same time as the initial founding of the Bremond Block. Now, I try to find out some history about James T. Brown, and there seems to be more written about the home and its architecture than there is about the man. But given the fact that his home will obtusely stand in the way of modern day decadence, I'm renaming him the godfather of hell no, because nobody is moving his house. It's going to stay there, and it's going to continue to share the address of 610 Guadalupe. It's as though somebody in the development firm looked up the history of that block and the curse and said, remember the Alamo? Yeah. I firmly believe that the spirits of those who were passionate about their homes remain to protect them in many cases. They have made us stewards of their properties and their stories. And they're watching. And they're listening. And the question is, are we listening to their stories, to their history, to what they have to say in response to their homes and their property and their passion? I want to thank you for coming along on this virtual tour of the Bremond Block and its history and hauntings. This coming Sunday, Roberto Music from Italy will be returning to us again. He guided us through Pompeii a couple of weeks back. And by the way, the link for that Pompeii tour is on our website right now. I know I'm going to be checking it out. And he'll be guiding us through a tour of some more South Italy locations. New podcast is up. Fiona, our new friend from Ireland, who led us through Dublin's fair city, she'll be back on the podcast to talk about more details of the tour that she gave us last Sunday. And coming soon, might have heard us chatting about it earlier before we got going on this tour, a mind-blowing tour and investigation of pioneer farms. Stephanie and I were out there last night during the full moon, taking advantage of all that energy and the evidence we captured on video and audio is pretty astounding. And we want to thank our friends out there at Pioneer Farms for accommodating us so kindly. Looks like our plans to be back out on the street have been waylaid by a couple of weeks by the mayor of Austin. So it looks like beginning of June, we'll be starting to give walking tours again. Fingers crossed that we can get together then. In the meantime, we hope to continue entertaining you and informing you with these virtual tours. It's been our pleasure to put these together for you and sharing this information with you. And hopefully we can keep you entertained. So let's check in with Alexandra to see if there are any questions.
We don't have any questions.
Yeah.
I feel like that's actually usually a pretty good sign. You've told us everything we need to know. But if anyone does have any questions, now that the tour is over, you're more than welcome to turn on your mic if you'd like to ask a question. I know usually we have people put questions in the chat room, but I didn't get a single question in the chat room this time. Everybody was
Rapt attention.
thoroughly engaged. It was great.
Well, sure. Awesome. I would like to know if anyone wants to chime in. Have you been to the Bremond Block? Have you wandered that area of town and just not known anything about it, or what have you known about it? How informative was this?
I myself have actually been to the Bremond Block. I actually went with Elizabeth one time. I was hoping to take over that tour for her on Saturdays where she goes to the Bremond Block. But Elizabeth, she is a wealth of information. She's an encyclopedia, and I couldn't possibly grasp all the knowledge that she had. But I do remember actually getting a chance to go into the women's club, and there is a neat energy to it, a very welcoming and warming energy to it that I was pleasantly surprised about. And I think I've heard almost every single one of those stories, not necessarily from a ghost tour guide, but someone who, walking by, mentioned, "Oh, did you tell him the ghost story? Did you tell him my story? Did you?"
Okay. So
people who've worked in the buildings have mentioned, as we were walking by. I think some of them have gotten to know Elizabeth from coming into work on Saturdays and then just seeing her around.
So, yeah, perhaps they were a little bit more open to talking about the ghosts. And they realized there that just like the Paramount Theater, that the ghosts are there to protect them and help them appreciate it. And, one lifetime in Chateau Bellevue just wasn't enough.
Exactly.
They have to continue that experience and keep on keeping on.
Yeah. Well, I've went ahead and put those links in the chat, everybody, for our website and our new podcast. And like Monica said, keep an eye out for our upcoming tours, investigations, and guests.
Yep, keep checking the website as well as our Facebook page. Become our friends on Facebook, and you'll be up to speed on everything going on. And as we go through some of the evidence for Pioneer Farms, we'll maybe post some of those things, little dribs and drabs, little sousson of
a little sousson,
a little taste.
Yeah, and of course, everybody, tips are always greatly appreciated. But the biggest tip you could give Monica, the biggest one of all, is to leave her a review on Yelp or TripAdvisor.
Yay! Oh, thank you so much.
Always love hearing from you guys about how we're doing and what experiences that you've had. And if you have someone who won't tell you, who won't listen to your experience, we're always happy to listen to it.
We are good listeners.